This is the ClePunk podcast. This is dedicated to the Cleveland punk scene, a scene that planted its flag in the 1970s and that flag still stands today. You'll hear from the bands, the characters, the contributors, the lake rats, the gypsies of the Dead Man's Curve, and the dwellers of the East, West, and South Side. We let them tell the story like it isn't like it was. There's no holding back. What it was ClePunk. Today, I'm joined by Craig Bell on the ClePunk podcast, and Craig has been a gem of the Cleveland music scene since the early 70s when he was in the Mirrors and Rocker from the Tombs, two of the most influential early bands from the Cleveland scene. After a little bit of a hitch in the Army and what have you, and coming back and joining the Mirrors again and Rock for the Tombs, he ended up in Connecticut, where he played with bands like the Saucers and the Future Plan, the Plan, and the Bell System. He's been in a band called the Rhythm Methodists, the Down Five, D's and Gizmos. This guy's like the Leland Sklar of freaking music. He's been in more freaking bands, but they're all good ones. He has most recently been in X Blank X, not recently, but within that, Rock from the Tombs reunions, and we're just happy to have Craig here today. So good morning, Craig. How are you?
Good morning. Hi.
I try
I'm
to
doing
keep these.
fine. I'm tired just listening to all of that.
Don't be. It's like freaking
And we even left out a couple of stints with Canada's Simply Saucer, my friend Edgar Bro's band. I've done a couple of American tours in the last 4 or 5 years with those guys.
Wow.
And I have my own outfit right now called Craig Bell and the Dead Man's Handle. So yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's good.
I know.
Crappy
When you put it all
research
out
on
there,
my
it
part.
looks like a lot. When did all this happen?
God, no kidding. So yeah, you were a Cleveland boy. You went to Lakewood High, and I don't want to be Jane Scott, who went to Lakewood High, as a matter of fact. I always talk to the musicians about where they went to high school. I don't know, for some reason, maybe it's football like days, but it's like I love the high schools. I just love, so you were a Ranger.
I was a Ranger, that's right.
And the Rangers, I mean, not the Rangers, because they were probably pretty shitty at football, but I mean, you guys.
Senior year they were.
Well, I mean, but Jack Buck, like, think about the alumni from Lakewood High School. Jack Buck, the greatest announcer. I mean, next to Scully, might have been one of the best baseball announcers ever.
Jack Buck was a graduate of Lakewood High.
Yeah, Jack Buck. Dick Celeste, who was our governor for a while. And
Dick Celeste also was like a deacon or something like that in my church,
no
the
kidding.
Methodist Church in Lakewood. Yeah, I remember him being at the church services when I was a kid.
Kidding. Yeah, Cliff Lewis, the Browns' first quarterback. He was from Lakewood High, if I remember correctly, right? David Conte, there were like some composers from Lakewood High.
There was a '60s tennis player, like
Really?
U.S. Open kind of guy named Gardner or something like that. He was before me, but I remember he was the big athlete. Tom Cousineau.
No way! I didn't know. No kidding.
Cousineau was Lakewood High.
Oh, I had his autograph when I lived in Columbus when he played for Woody.
I think his dad might have coached the football team also.
There's something about. I thought he must have gone to one of the Catholic schools, but no, he was a Lakewood guy. I know a kid from Connecticut, Parker Pennington. He's a world-class figure skater. He went to Lakewood High. And I ironically know Parker. I got 2 stupid cats from his father, who's a vet in frickin' Hartford. You can kill those things, my wife's. But were you like, no, I like the cat.
One of mine,
I just turned down a dog because they had 2 cats downstairs. I was like, I needed a dog. I'm going to retire soon. I need something to sit out in the backyard with and have a cigar and talk to. Because I have 3 daughters that are gone, basically, and a wife. I mean, 4 wives, but anyway.
Oh, wow.
Well, that's what it is. When you have 3 daughters and a wife, you have 4 wives. Trust me.
I can understand that.
So were you a teenage musician that found underground? I don't want to classify all this shit, but what we play, right? Or what you did. I won't put myself in that class. But were you a teenage musician that found that music, or did that music inspire you? Like when you talk about the Velvets and all that stuff. Did that inspire you to play, or were you always, did you have a musical bent when you were little, or how did that work out?
Well, my memories go back to being fascinated with the radio, and I listened to the radio as a young kid religiously, and would try to find how far away I could find stations on my AM radio. So I'm listening to all sorts of different kind of music and stuff like that. So music always was there for me. That there wasn't a lot of music in our home. My dad and my mom were. My mom liked Sinatra, and they had a couple of Jackie Gleason records and things like that. My
Jackie
dad was,
Gleason was amazing.
oh yeah,
His
his
orchestration, he
yes.
slows everything down just a little. You know, like,
Hmm.
so, I mean, I don't want to get in on that, but Jackie
No, no,
Gleason,
I was a big Jackie Gleason fan
nobody
as
knows.
a
He never read music. Never
yeah.
read.
Oh no, it was just yeah by ear. Everything was by
Exactly.
ear.
So, sorry to interject, but
But my dad's main thing was bagpipe music, so I listened to a lot of bagpipe music when I was a kid
uh,
in our
I,
home. Yeah, so but through the radio, listening to rock and roll and things as rock and roll came along, but also listening to country music, listening to soul music and R&B, and the early days of Motown things that influenced me. And of course, the English invasion happening right as I was turning 13 years old was a huge influence on me. I remember, I believe it was the summer of '65, that my friend Dave Davis and I went over to Rocky River on a Saturday afternoon and sat in the Beach Cliff Theater. I think sat through the Jerry and the Pacemakers movie, Ferry Across the Mersey, I think about 3 times.
no way.
And and on the way home, just we both just said, "Oh man, I want to be in a rock and roll band. I want to be in a rock and roll band." And I just from that point on, I thought, okay, how do I go about doing this? Because my father was not a big fan of guitars and things like that.
Yeah.
His attitude was that if you were interested in music, then you need to play a proper instrument, which to him was, a brass or a woodwind or a violin or something like that. So and the Lakewood schools were really great. They had great music programs for young kids, and you could rent out, or even I don't even know if you had to pay for it, but they would give you an instrument. So I tried the trombone. That didn't work. Then I tried the clarinet, and that was a little bit better, but that didn't work. So I just said, man, I just, really what I want is a guitar. But as long as I was living at home, that wasn't going to happen. So instead, I started hanging around with my friends who did have guitars, and hanging around with friends that were in a band or something. And it wasn't until after I graduated from high school, I went out to California for a while, and was seeing what was going on out there. Went to San Francisco for a while, and couldn't get anything together out there. So I came back after about a year. So it was early '71 that I ran into my friend Sherry, whose boyfriend was Jim Crook. And Jim had just gotten out of the Army. This was the spring of '71. Just gotten out of the Army, and we were at the Agora for the Velvet Underground show that wasn't really the Velvet Underground. It was Doug Yule and I think Walter Powers, and I think Sterling Morrison was there, but anyway, it wasn't the Velvet Underground, but it was
Build
kind of
as
like the
such.
Velvet. Yes. But anyway, there was Jim, and Jim had just gotten home from Vietnam, his 2-year stint there. I had met Jim when I was in high school because he was dating my friend Sherry, who, you know, so I would, we were hanging out with them. My girlfriend was good friends with her, so we all hung out together. And so I asked Jim, well, what are you doing? And he says, oh, my friend and want to get a band together. And I said, oh, really? I want to be in a band. Well, what do you play? Well, I said, well, I don't really play anything, but I want to play something. I know a little bit of guitar. He goes, well, come on over to my place and we'll meet. You can meet Jamie and we'll play you what we've been recording and stuff. So that's how I met those guys, met Jamie Klimek and through Jim. And over on the west side, over on 104th Street, Jim had a third floor apartment. So they played me some tapes they had made, and we played records and we talked. And after a couple of times of hanging out, Jamie just looks at me and says, well, I guess we'll make you the bass player. And he hands me a bass guitar and he goes, here's how you tune it. And he says, just figure out the rest of it for yourself. So I just started playing. I think I might have gotten I don't even think they had a Mel Bay book for bass guitars, but I probably had a Mel Bay book for regular guitar.
Just cut the last
Uh,
two strings off.
yeah. And also by this time I had moved out of, when I graduated from high school, I moved out of the house. So I was free to go and join a band, and stuff like that because, I got a job and all that. And, you know, and to my parents' credit, I mean, that's when I started. I've pretty much been doing this ever since. So that's like 50 some years. My parents, even though they just thought I was crazy for doing what I do, why do this? It doesn't seem like it's going anywhere or anything like that. But they never criticized it. They always just, they supported me. They weren't cheerleaders, but they were always, you know, never told me that I was stupid. They just said they just didn't understand it.
Well, it dawned on me when I was kind of not, thinking about how to interviewing you, that you've kept, you worked on the railroads, like so and that could be a thing, where parents, not just yours, but parents respect the fact that you're working and that you have a band, you have a music interest, and it's there, and if it ever, yeah, something happens and it skyrockets, that works. But you've always kept, you have this other thing in your life that's called responsibility and job. And it dawned on me, and I was thinking about interviewing you. That's what probably held back a lot of guys in Cleveland is the fact that it's a work ethic town. Like, so how many guys did you know in Cleveland that just took off to become famous musicians? There weren't
Well,
that many. I mean, there
not
were a few.
that many, but there were a
There were
few,
a few.
and I've worked with a number of them.
No, well, sure, but I'm just saying, like, maybe for my, but like Climb, those guys didn't take off to become famous rock stars someplace. And I think there's a work ethic in Cleveland that was, I'm going to have a job, I'm going to play in a band, but I want to make sure that I'm responsible with what I do. I don't know. Maybe it's just maybe it's just weird, but it's just, I mean, I imagine in L.A. people are just like, eh. And places like Michigan where parents were a little richer than in Ohio. So their kids could afford to just take off and become, they want to be rock stars or what have you. They have 2 years to kill. They were going to U of M anyway. None of us were going to college. I mean, most of us weren't, right? It was just work ethic. And your parents would respect you if you had a job. You could do whatever you want. You go buy a Stratocaster, you can go play your stuff, but you're going to, anyway, I'm digressing on that. But you
No,
guys,
but I agree with you. You're absolutely right. I think and I really appreciate that my parents did instill that. I know my siblings do too. I have two sisters and a brother, and all of us, have agreed that our parents, for whatever things that they gave us, the one thing they gave us was this ethic, this work ethic, as you say, basically saying if you want something, go get it.
no shit.
And they respected us, you know, in our, all four of us have been, I don't know, you want to call it successful,
Well,
whatever.
yeah.
Yeah. Like my mom said one day talking to my sister, she says, "Well, Craig seems to be doing all right. At least he's not in jail." So I'm thinking,
Damn with
okay,
faint
well,
praise,
my
right?
mom's proud of me that I've managed to stay out of jail, so that's good. I'm doing good.
That's it. So, how many of your
But
other your
I did appreciate, I just want to say, I did appreciate that they did instill that kind of work ethic in me because sometimes playing music and just living your life, you just wonder sometimes, man, why? What are you doing? And just, and you go back to that thing deep down inside you, because it was instilled in you that says, yeah, this is what you wanted. This is what you want to do.
absolutely
Yeah, it sucks right now, but this
right.
is, this is why we're here.
Absolutely, and frankly, it made boot camp. I followed you about 10 years later to boot camp, but it made it easier having parents that demanded something out of you. Because I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't know how many times you woke up going, I can't. I remember my old man dropped me off the federal building, and I think his last words were, "I'll see you in 2 fucking weeks because this ain't gonna work," you know. And how many times I woke up in the middle of the rack, at night on my rack and went, "I'm out of here," and then like, "Nah, man, no, no, no." It's like you got to work through it. It's like just get up, do more push-ups, get your ass out of fucking rack, and go run. But um, but yeah, I think Cleveland parents had a lot to do with that. They just really they came from that ethnic work ethic culture, and that served us all fairly really well. Served us all really well.
And both my parents were veterans of World War II. My father, served in the Pacific for 6 years. No, well, maybe 5 or 6 years. And my mom was in the Navy.
You got to be
So
kidding me. That's
when
rare.
well, she was a secretary to a doctor at the Naval Hospital in Jacksonville, Florida during the war.
Whatever. But she was in the
Yeah, but
Navy.
in World War II, man, it
Saddle
was
up.
all hands on deck. Yeah, buckle up, let's go.
God bless.
Let's not even get into
No,
that
no,
kind of.
no. But I mean, like, that's no, no, no. That's proud shit.
But I felt, I just, that was just sort of, I don't know. I don't want to say that it just was a given that you did stuff like that, but it just seemed more just part of your life at that time. I mean, hell, Elvis was in the army.
Well, they all were, and you were in that first. Yeah, well, and they weren't kind of getting trying to get out. Well, maybe they were. I mean, the rich kids, I'm sure, weren't going. Well, that's not true. World
Well,
War
Jimi
II,
Hendrix,
Korea, rich kids were probably
Jimi
less in
Hendrix got
Korea,
out.
but by now, kids were getting out. Like they weren't. Who else from your circle besides Crook were did get enlisted? I mean, drafted. You guys did. You guys were
Yeah, we
dragged
weren't
along in
enlisted.
chains.
Both of us were drafted. Of our circle now, I'm sure there might be somebody else, but I cannot think of anyone else who in
Oh,
our
besides you and
group
Jim.
of musical people, except me and Jim, who
Okay.
were in the military previous to, doing stuff. I know that the easiest thing in the world to do is just go to school. You could easily get a student deferment and go study, and you would have to, just you're postponing your service, but you could postpone it 2 or 3 years. If I had done that, heck, well, I mean, I mean, in the middle of my service, the war in Vietnam ended,
Ended. Yeah.
and so I wasn't going anywhere anyway. But just turned out that I didn't go overseas anyhow.
Right.
For however, I mean, the army's a weird place because everybody thinks that everybody in the army's walking around with a gun. They're not. There's all sorts of stuff going on.
Well,
In the
absolutely.
army. Just like everything that happens in real life happens in the
Oh
military
yeah.
too.
No, I mean I used to
You,
go to Fort Sam down in San
yeah,
Antonio. Like you never see anybody with a firearm or weapon in at Fort Sam. That was a medical base,
yeah,
basically. Then you go out to Camp Bullis. Every swinging dick's got a freaking M16,
yep.
M6 grenade launcher, freaking looking at you, going, "What the hell you doing?" And we were Air Force boys. I happened to be a weapons supply guy, so I was armed. But there weren't many of us on the Air Force base that carried, especially at Lackland, where there was freaking recruits everywhere. Nobody carried firearms.
After I went to my after basic training, I never touched another weapon for the rest of my tour except for one night when they put me on guard duty and handed me a shotgun,
A
and we rode
shotgun.
around with people all night. Well, we were guarding the empty ammo dump on Fort Monmouth, which was nothing but these old mounds, where they had bunkers
Yeah,
where they stored ammunition.
absolutely.
And now it's just a place where all these goats roamed around and ate the grass. And we just drove around that like every hour and then go back and sit in the room. And that was our, overnight.
Fucking shotgun. A little
Yeah,
close to shoot a man. You got to be about 20 yards away and piss him off. It's like,
well, that was the whole idea, I guess, was that, it was whatever you're going to encounter up close and
well,
personal.
yeah, that's why we had 38. So we find a
Yeah.
shotgun. I don't know
I don't
about
know. You
that.
could hand me the shotgun.
I
I could
hunt
see that.
deer with shotgun, but I hunt birds and ducks with them. But I piss a man off shooting with a shotgun. I'd
I
rather
didn't.
have my
I
damn.
just. I didn't even. Be honest with you, I can't even remember now if it was loaded or
Well,
not.
I probably was. Well, no, and they were juried.
Probably
They
was.
juried
Yeah,
your rounds pretty quickly.
I,
So
I think it was.
So you came back from the army, you rejoined the Mirrors, and Jim Jones and who else was? Somebody was filling in for you a little bit while you were gone. Am I right on that, or
While I
do I
was
have the bands wrong?
while I was gone, Jim Jones joined the band in my place, and Paul Murata also at that
That's right.
time. And when I came back, Jim stepped aside. I rejoined the band, and then for that went on for about a year, and then towards the end of that is when I was invited to join Rocket from the Tombs. And then after that, I was dismissed from Mirrors a little while later. And then Jim came back and was with Mirrors until the end, I think, in what, around 77, 78, I think.
So
It
Peter
gets going.
Wagner asked, I think the story goes right. Peter asked you to join or to come and audition or something for Rocket from the
Yes,
Tombs,
some audition,
and
yeah.
then you that clicked. And so, like, did Cheetah and David and all those guys have to approve all this? Was it kind of cool, like how it went? Because by then you could play the bass pretty well, I'm sure.
Yes, it was. Well, Peter and David had come to see Mirrors. Peter was a big supporter. Peter and his wife Charlotte were huge supporters of Mirrors, probably our biggest fans. I'd say one or both of them were at every show we did. Not that we did a lot of shows, but they would always be there. You could count on them, one or both of them there. And I saw David a couple of times at a couple of shows we did. So they knew what I could do, which is, I believe, why they asked me. And I think it was up to the two of them because they were. I think Peter had joined Rocket from the Tombs because it was going on previous to that, sort of as a offshoot project that David was doing, but he wanted to sort of take it in another direction at that time, and that's when Peter had joined, and those two guys dissolved that version of the band, and then recruited Johnny and Cheetah, and then they asked me to come over.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And you, so you were with the Mirrors. You were playing at places, Clockwork Orange, place like. Where was that club, by the way?
That was on Payne,
Oh,
down by the bus station, I think.
okay.
And yeah, that was a wild place. It was a place where off-duty cops hung out too. So there was a lot of, we didn't have a lot of fans there, but we played. I think for an entire summer we played every Tuesday night there,
Really?
and it was just a really good experience to just play and play and play,
Absolutely.
whether you were playing in front of a bunch of people or no people.
Right.
It just really got us a chance to get it. And we were playing out at, I remember we played out at Baldwin Wallace a couple of times.
Okay.
And there was a place called the Lakeside Inn, I think out on Lakeshore, out on Waterloo Road
Mhm.
somewhere. We played out there. I remember it was this venue and had all these stuffed animals hanging from the ceiling, which was really strange. And, places like that. And of course, the Viking Saloon.
Okay. And where was that?
The Viking was on Chester
Okay.
around 20th, 21st, somewhere in there in the 20s on Chester. I think it's where the soccer field is now for Cleveland State.
Okay. Oh, right. Okay. Did you ever hear of a club called Cyrus Erie?
Oh, yeah.
What? What?
Yep.
This is so off topic, but I lived in North Ridgeville before I
Hmm.
moved down to Columbus with my dad. Probably was down there, like probably North
That
Ridgeville
was
till
Cyrus
seventh
Area
grade.
West. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, oh, there was two. I didn't. I was
Yeah,
going to ask you
I
about that
think the
club
first
because it
one,
was like,
I thought the first one was over on the east side, like in Menor or someplace like
oh, it
that.
could very well be.
But the one up in North Olmsted on Ridgeville Road,
Right. It was right on the. It was like on the line. Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely on Route
yeah,
20.
I went to, I saw a lot of bands
No
there.
kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, the nuns
Yes.
at St. Peter's used to tell us all the time that's where all evil people hung out. Because you guys are
Oh,
10 years
well,
older than us. So the nuns would say, like, you never can go into Cyrus Erie when you get older because that's where the druggies are. And we'd sit there.
yeah.
So that just made us all the more interested in Cyrus Erie.
And it was a teen club. It didn't even sell alcohol.
Really?
No, it was,
Was in a shopping
I
center.
was in high school. It was in a shopping center. Well, when I was in high school, I believe it was a teen club, and it was just, soft drinks and things like
No
that.
kidding.
You went there to smoke cigarettes,
Well,
you know,
we did
and,
that
and,
anyway.
and chase girls.
Seriously.
But yeah, oh, geez, I think I saw Slade there.
No way.
I saw the Stooges. I think the
No
Stooges.
way.
There was another place. I keep getting this mixed up because I thought that there was also a place out in Elyria at one time.
Uh, So,
The
to
the
me,
Hull
Cyrus
Club.
Erie was on the border of North Ridgeville and Elyria going west, is where I
Okay,
remember it because I
maybe
would
I'm
take my,
thinking maybe I'm thinking of the same
not
place
the
then.
North Olmsted side, that's east. So I just remember riding my bike out there, smoking cigarettes behind the
Mhm.
schoolyards and stuff, in sixth, seventh grade. But we used to drive out there just to look at it and go
Yeah,
like, yeah, this is where cool people go.
well, that was the place to
No
go. I
shit.
mean,
That's
uh,
awesome. So you
you
left the
had
Mirrors. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying that, you had to be, when I was in junior high school, I was too young to go there, but I knew about it. But once you got to high school, and then somebody has a car, then you can go out there and,
That's
hang out.
awesome. So you left to mirrors. I read something you wrote that actually you told Jamie, and you don't have to talk about this if you don't want, but he wrote you a letter or something that like
Hmm.
dismissed you from the base. You don't have to. I just thought
Fired me, yeah.
I thought
He
that was a
fired me.
little like formal for. I mean, it's
Well, it was nice of him to let me know. Yeah, it was, what had happened when Peter approached me to come and audition for Rocket. Mirrors, we hadn't been doing anything. I mean, we hadn't even been practicing in like a couple of months.
Mhm.
We seemed to be like in a doldrum period. And I remember I was living with Jamie. We were living over on 52nd and Store in this duplex. And downstairs, Paul Murata and his wife Jill and their young son Paulie lived, and Jamie and I lived upstairs. And I came downstairs, and Jamie was getting his hair cut. Jill was cutting his hair, and I told him, I said, "Hey, Peter was over, and he asked me to come down and play with David, and he's got these two kids that they're trying to get something together." And I said, "I know we're not doing anything right now, so I thought I'd go over and see just what this was about. But whenever we're doing something, that'll be the first priority. Is I'll always be here because I mean I was still living there." So started doing that, and then circumstances came up where I ended up moving out of the house. But still, we were in, good relations. But I moved in with Peter and Charlotte down at the plaza. And then I was practicing with them, and it came to the first extermination night, which was December of '74, I believe. And it was it was the Eels, Rocks from the Tombs, and Mirrors. So Jamie says, "Well, I want you playing with Mirrors. I don't want you to play with Rocket." And I said, "Okay." So I didn't play with Rocket that night, even though that was the first show of the new lineup. They played without a bass player. And there's a recording of that, I believe, on the Ubu website of the Extermination Night show without any bass guitar. But there's also recordings on some Mirrors. I think on Hands in My Pockets, there's recordings from the Viking show where I'm playing bass with Mirrors. So I did that show with them, played bass. There was supposed to be another show in January, which people say happened. I didn't think happened, but nevertheless, I played. If it did happen, I played with Rocket in that one. And after that is when I got the letter, and I was dismissed.
It's funny how when you're younger in bands, people are more territorial about their bands. As you get older, you just become mercenaries in your whores, and we just play. And it's not no.
And,
Mercenaries and whores is the wrong way to put
and
it. You become social about your music, and you interchange with
yeah,
other bands, and you play. Like I'm in a couple bands. I don't, and nobody gets
yeah.
pissed off that you're in a band with other people, and they don't say who's your priority. It's like. But when you're younger, it's like, oh yeah, you can't play with them because you're with us, and it's like fucking gang shit. It's like, no, man.
Well, it was like that. I mean, there was a lot of that. That you're in this band, you're not that band,
Right.
and that stuff sort of carried through into the Connecticut scene later on when we were out there. And one of the things I tried to do out there was I used to do these shows called Pluto, where we would have a show to benefit, say, a soup kitchen or a veterans center or whatever. And I would ask people in different bands, say, "Hey, come do this benefit show with us." But the one rule is only two members of the same band can play together. You got to play with people from a different band.
That's a great
So,
idea.
and these people, and we did about nine of them over the years. And people they started interacting with other musicians in New Haven, and it really helped bring that scene together because instead of everybody being their own little camp, like over here's this band and over here's that band, and we don't talk to each other, and we're enemies. No, it's sort of softening that. And then you're right, like now,
Yeah.
you're playing. Oh, you want me to play with you? Sure, yeah, let's go. Let's see what
Right.
happens. I'm like I'm happy to work with anyone who is serious.
Absolutely.
Unless they really suck.
Well, yeah,
You know,
there's a lot of those. But.
Well, there's different levels of suckage too, so you gotta.
There totally are, but and I know you brought songs from the Mirrors to Rocket from the Tombs right away, like Muckraker, right, and Frustration. You wrote those,
Yes,
and you brought those to Rocket from the Tombs because they did those tunes, right?
yes.
That's cool.
Yep, we did
Read 'em
both
and
of
Weep,
those.
I think, was another one that you wrote.
We didn't leave. I wrote while I was in Rocket,
Oh, okay. And
and
Final Solution, of course. I mean, I don't want to be the
Final,
cliche interviewer, but
but
that's
Final Solution was,
yeah.
yeah, that was David. David and I showed up early to practice one day, and before everybody else got there, we sat down, and he said, "Oh, I've got this new song I'm working on. Here, let me show it to you." And he just sat there next to the table, and he just started banging his hand on the table on a beat, and girls won't touch me because I got a misdirect. And I'm playing along on the
Right.
bass, and we get to that point, and he looks at me, and he goes, "Do something." Well,
Yeah.
so I had this bass right here,
No
my Mo's
shit.
right. So, I just,
Boom.
he goes, "Do something." I was like, he goes, "Oh, that's not bad." So, then the rest of the guys show up. So we start right from there. And you know, by a little while there, Peter added the last bit to it, and we had ourselves a new song.
No kidding.
Yeah, that was really the first time for me to collaborate like that on something.
No kidding. I mean, that became, right. Like, if you would have told me, I don't want to date all of us, but yeah, if you would have told me 40 years ago that, here you will be talking to the one of the guys that wrote Final Solution. Because I mean, we cut our teeth on that shit. Like, when we went down to, you go down to the Drome in '78, and it's like, oh, wow, Final Solution. Like, I got a copy of it, and it was on a Hearthen, I think it was. It was the single.
Hmm.
I'm a
Hmm.
fraud. I sold my punk collection about a year ago to this collector up in Massachusetts who was like, "You've got Six and Change, you've got all the original Ubu shit, you've got all this
Wow.
Devo stuff, you've got all the pagans." And I was like, "Yeah," like I knew it was kind of worth something. And he was like, "All of that," and I was, the fuck, yeah, sure. Like if I die, it's gonna end up in a freaking garage sale, and no one will know, you know.
That's the absolute truth too. Is
And
that
so,
was one of the biggest. We were speaking of Jim Jones a little bit
yeah,
earlier, and one of the biggest things um, that was a concern, at least for me, and I hope for other people too, was what's going to happen to all those tapes that Jim had, and all of that. Well, I've heard now that the stuff has been preserved. I believe Marky Ray is caring for it, which is great because it would just be such a shame for all that stuff to be lost because he was there from the very beginning.
right away.
I mean, there would be no beginning without Jim Jones, and it's just to have lost, and there was a great possibility that that could have happened. So I'm so happy that that was preserved.
So you knew Jim from Rendezvous from late '60s, early '70s.
I was still in high school, so I graduated in 1970, so it had to be at least 70, maybe 69. I met him at Rendezvous. I'd go down the weekends like everybody else, go record shopping and stuff. And yeah, he turned me on. So him and Mike Weldon, the drummer in Mirrors, who I went to high school with,
Mm.
who I met when I was in high school. I think we were locker mates, or we were next door to each other, or something like that. But yeah, he and Jones turned me on to so much music. Just opened my eyes to so much cool stuff.
Yeah, they were the
When I
Godfathers. I mean,
Yeah,
they,
oh,
they were the
absolutely.
Godfathers. I know later on Scott Krause started working there at the downtown store,
Yeah,
and
Anton Fier worked there
yeah,
for a while.
that's true. Um,
Wow.
and like I said, I worked at the mall Rendezvous earlier when we were talking, and they were Godfathers. They were like, we just revered them so much, and
Yeah.
we were kind of
Oh,
like the nerd freaking mall store, But they dug us. They were cool because we had imports, and they knew I was the only kind of guy that was into punk that worked there. Our manager was a little weird, but he knew all those guys. He worked downtown with them, Rusty,
yeah.
and he could name any album that was out and knew the spline number on everything.
Catalog.
So, oh, the
Oh,
cat
wow.
totally like CBS like 3 4. CBS was always threes. 3 4 6 0 4 4 4. 5 digits actually.
Yeah.
That's blah blah blah. Bob Dylan's greatest hits. The fucking guy knew him off his head. He could do inventory in his head. and and we treated
I,
Record Rendezvous great. Like we would never steal from. They were so good. They were such good people. If you wanted anything, they'd get you tickets. They would do it. The Minces were awesome. But Jones, Krause, those guys were freaking legends, man. They just were such good guys. And they would
oh
send us
yeah, they were.
singles, to sell. Like they didn't hog it all down there. They'd go like, "Oh, dude in Menor is pushing the punk rock shit, so we'll send singles down to him to push." So I always appreciated that.
Well, and Jim's mission in life was to turn you on to good music. He had such great joy that he could. I remember going over to his house, and we would just sit and play records, all evening, and he would just delight with, oh, here's the English copy of the Rolling Stones doing, I don't know, Little Red Rooster or whatever, and he goes, now here on the American record, it fades out right here and he'll turn down the stereo. And he goes, but on the English copy, he turns it back up and it goes on for like another 30. And he's like, you can just see the joy in his face. And he's like, because you're like, oh, wow, yeah.
And he didn't like
It,
bad music. Like he was good about saying, I don't like,
oh, yeah.
he didn't, he inspired me once. I mean, we didn't really know each other well. He just knew of him. I mean, I knew of him obviously, but he knew that there was this punk guy working down at the Great Lakes store. But this chick named Ellen Foley came in to the store, and she sang backup on that Meatloaf song with fucking Phil Rizzuto and shit. The one for the
Yep.
dashboard thing. I'm not really into that. But she came in with her manager. I didn't know who she was, but I knew that like when people would come in and say, "What do you think about this record?" I would tell them the truth. Like I would say, "That record sucks," or you might like it, but I think it blows. And it was her. And she came in with her manager, and she's like, "Hey, do you have that Ellen Foley record?" And I said, the fuck would you buy that for? That thing's a pile of shit. I said she does Thunder and Rain by Graham Parker, and she does a horrible version. Rusty comes running out of the back fucking room. He's like, no, 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 no,
Oh,
no, no,
no.
no, 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 go away, go away. I'm like, fuck's sake. I was like, thanks, Jim. Like I'm gonna tell I just tell it like it is, man. You just don't fucking play games with people. Just tell them what you fucking like. But they were cool people. So like '75, the Atom splits, right? That's about when the Rocket from the Tombs turns into two bands. Is that about when that happened? Because y'all became
Yeah,
Pierre
Rock
Rubin
from
went
the
one way, Dead Boys another, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, Rock from the
Frankenstein.
Tunes, pretty much that version of it lasted from late 74 to late 75, about a year. We just went, and then, in that period of time. And the breakup came, and David and Peter went on to form Ubu, and Cheetah and Stiv started up the Dead, and Blitz started up the Dead Boys, yeah. And I played with the early, well, they were Frankenstein then. The Dead Boys were calling themselves
Right.
Frankenstein. They first started. And I played, early on, I played with them for a couple of rehearsals, and then I was also doing something else and playing with somebody else. And they decided to go without a bass player when they made their debut. I think it was on Halloween of that year of 75. And I don't think they got Jeff until they went to New York, did they?
Well, he wasn't even on their first record, so I don't know
No,
what
that's
happened.
true. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I forget
that
the
was
guy's name that was on the first record, but he was certainly on the second. He must have been. I don't know
Peter
what the story
had a
was.
lot of the bass on it too, I think.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but you were considered for both bands, and you just kind of said,
They asked, I was asked for both bands, but at that time, after Rocket had broken up, I was just sort of start formulating in my mind that I'd like to try something different, possibly try, since I had started writing songs and things, to try to get my own band together. But I didn't really do much with that at the time in Cleveland because I also felt like I needed to find a decent job because I was working in record warehouse. I worked for Northern Records and then I worked for Prospect Record Service.
no, I worked for Northern for a while.
Did you know Chuck Young?
I can't remember that name. I can't. This would have been late.
Oh,
This would have been like 78, 9, like, and actually probably 80. Actually, before I went in, after Rendezvous and before I joined the service, because
right.
they were fulfillment. They were the fulfillment center for record theater.
Yeah,
I remember, and
yeah.
yeah,
Oh, they
absolutely,
were big. Yeah, Northern
huge.
was big. I worked in the One Stop up there, and Chuck Young was the manager of the One Stop, and he's a legendary um, guy in the Cleveland music
Right.
scene in terms of record promotions, radio stuff, and distribution. And that he was well known, and he was a real character. But he like sort of
Huh.
took me under his wing. He was going to show me the record business, so he would always be on my ass, just saying, "Oh, you got to do this, and you got to do that, and you got to take these. You got to make sure you take care of these guys. You got to take care of that guy. Oh, he's got to have this in stock and that in stock. You got to know. You got to know your records. You got to know your records." Okay, Chuck.
Pack them, ship them, get them in that little van,
Get
and
him,
drive them for.
get him out the door. Get him in, get him out. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I think it was like Mike Way worked in the one I was at or something. And then, I don't know. Like I said, it was, I didn't spend a lot of time in the distribution side because I loved the retail side. But then it was like, I left for the service and was like, screw it.
No.
But
Yeah, it was pretty much basically it was warehouse work. It was moving
absolutely.
box.
Those
That's
conveyor
it.
belts that were, they weren't conveyor belts, but they were roller belts. And you just, with all the
Yeah.
fucking records in the tubs and shit, and you'd pack the fuck. I remember that shit. That was great.
Up, or else you'd be having pallets of them on shelves. And you got to take them down and take 150 and send them to Woolworths and
Right.
that kind
And
of
no
stuff.
perks. Like, it wasn't like you got concert tickets. It wasn't like you got freaking laid for working in a record store. It was like fucking, I didn't get
Yeah.
many perks from freaking any of those distributors.
No, the one thing was the one thing was like I remember Jamie worked in the returns department. And I remember like you would get a pallet shipment of a return from say W.T. Grant or something of the first Nico album. And they'd already been marked down to 99 cents and they couldn't sell and they came back. So now you could probably get them for a dime or something.
Yeah.
A lot of collectors would buy up a lot, it was very rare when something really collectible came in, but when it did, man, the hawks were just all
I
over it.
do remember going through all those things and looking and getting a lot of records through those,
Hmm. Oh
through
yeah, I
that.
got a lot that way too.
Absolutely. So like, I want to talk about your career after Cleveland, but I think it might be a good way to just kind of wrap up Cleveland. And we're not going to wrap it up because it's going to be like ongoing. But
Mm.
you ended up playing with Rocket from the Tombs in a reunion version of the band. You did some recordings, right?
Yes. Oh
And
yeah.
I remember
Uh,
Frank from Smogvale told me that David Thomas told him once that those captured the essence of the band better than ever. Like when you guys did those recordings, I forget what year that would have been, sometime in the 2000s.
2000, well, in 2003, we did the reunion where we played the show in LA.
Okay.
It was supposed to be a one-time get together. Richard Lloyd, we asked Richard Lloyd to join us, and he was a great addition to the band. He had been a fan of the band, and he was very happy to be part of it. And that ended up uh, becoming, instead of just a one-off thing, we did multiple tours and things like that. But before we did that big tour of the U.S., we figured we need something that shows the band as it is now. So we went to New York to Richard's studio and we re-recorded the old songs and made that album Rocket Redux. And Frank put it out. Frank did a quick. We recorded that in June, and we had it when the tour left in November. We had copies for sale. That was a quick turnaround
Wow.
uh, for CDs, in
Yeah.
those days. It was great, and 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 that record really, as time has gone on, it is an amazing record. It really does capture the feel of not only Rocket from the Tombs themselves, but it captures the feel of what that version of the band was like, what we were like in 2003. And I'm very happy that we got the chance to make that
20
record.
years. And that's when you
Yeah.
did. And then, so how many tours did you guys do with the reunited lineup?
With Richard and Cheetah lineup, we did those two tours. We did some shows. We went over to Germany and did a festival there, and then we came back. We did the Barfly album, and I think we did a couple of shows around that. And then Richard left the band, and we recruited Gary Saperko to take Richard's place, and then we toured, did a couple more tours after that, and then in I think around 2012 or something, that Cheetah left the band, and then Buddy Akita joined, and we did up until about 2014 we toured with Buddy and Gary as a guitarist. And since then, even though the band is not broken up, we just haven't done anything.
Right. Tell me
But
about
who knows?
emos. I heard there was a great emos story. That used to be one of our little haunts down in Austin. It's so off the beaten path too. It's not right. It's not on Sixth Street. It's a couple blocks away from all the like shit going on. Um,
Yeah, I was really disappointed that years later that I've been down to Austin. That was my first trip to Austin, was when Rocket did that show in
okay.
'03. In fact, I think somewhere on this wall is a poster from that show.
No
I
kidding.
can't right now, but somewhere up there is the poster from Emos. I forget where it is, but yeah, we get there and it's like 40 degrees and we walk into the front of the club and we go, great, where do we load in? Oh, the stage is back there, and we walk towards the back and all of a sudden you go out this door and you're outside. And you're like, what? Where's the stage? Oh, it's back there. So we go, what? So we're playing outside tonight in this weather. Really?
Okay.
So, okay. So, show starts, place is packed, and as soon as we start playing, people start throwing stuff up on the stage. So we stop. David says, don't throw things at us. We're not the kind of band you throw stuff at.
Right.
And if you do that again, we're walking off. So we start up again. Somebody throws something. I think actually they might have hit Richard, with a beer can or something.
What
But
the fuck?
we stop. David goes, let's go. We walk on. We're maybe in the second song, maybe. I don't know. I can't remember how long, but it wasn't long. He just goes, let's go. We walk off stage. We're off stage for about 20, 25 minutes, and the promoter's begging, Dave, we toss those guys out. We promised nobody will give you anything. He's going, nope.
Told him.
He said, 2 times, we told you, we're not going to go back. Guy's losing his mind. The crowds, you can hear the crowd out there, just like chanting and stuff like that. And finally, David relents, and he goes, all right, let's go. So we get up and we go back out. And David just goes up the microphone and he goes, all right, we're going to do a little exercise in time travel. He goes, we're going to forget the previous, half an hour, and just now we're in the now. And he just, gives us a high sign. We just take off and just blow through the set. I mean, it was incredible.
Nice.
The place was just electric after that.
That's a
And
great way to handle it.
nobody threw anything at us. And, we didn't, that was the only time I can remember I remember a couple of times somebody throw something up on stage, but we didn't get a lot of that. It
Well,
was,
you weren't that type of band.
no, we never were. I mean, and I've had people spit on me, back in the '80s, back in Connecticut. I had a couple instances where, we got a little people thinking that it's England, and that was, oh man. That
No,
was-
no. That's,
nasty. I can't. I've heard these stories about the Sex Pistols and some of these other English bands and what they would go through, and I can't imagine have people spitting on you like that.
No,
That's
but the Pistols
horrible.
did it to promote themselves. I mean, they didn't mind it because it was money for them. But because I still remember guys that I talked to when I was in San Antonio about the show at Randy's, where that was the nuts end of the life show where Sid was bleeding and everybody was crazy and they were spit. But
Yeah.
they that was kind of what they wanted. But you'd go see the Buzzcocks. Well, they didn't really tour over here, but bands that you would go to see when they did tour, and there weren't a lot touring, but you'd go see X at the Pirates Cove in 1979, 80. No one's spitting on anybody.
No.
And someone told me once, I won't mention their name, but it's a great quote. It's like when the guys that you hated in high school started going to the shows for the bands that you liked, that's when it fucked it all up.
Yeah, no, that's the absolute truth. Uh, Talk about the music scene we started in New Haven, Connecticut. When it started at Ron's place, and the first, 6 months of it was just, the bands, the surrounding fans of those bands. It was a tight little community, and it was a lot of fun. But then you started getting that outer layer of just regular Joes, or whatever you want to call it, the guys from high school. When the popularity and those people started coming, that's when the trouble started.
Yeah.
That's when things started going downhill. And I think that that's true in almost any scene. I think Same thing that happened to CBGB's.
I imagine so. I mean,
So
it was because I
this,
used to go to shows at the Ritz in Austin in the '80s. To see. I mean, there wasn't. I mean, Big Boys and shit like that, and Black Flag would tour in there, and the Dead Kennedys and stuff in the early mid '80s. Between '82 and '84 probably. I mean, they
Mhm.
get. That's when they started slam dancing and shit, which wasn't when we were going to see the Pagans and the Dead Boys and the Ramones in the late '70s. There was no slam dancing,
No.
but they were doing that. But there was no violent. There wasn't any real stupid violence. I mean, once in a while in San Antonio, you'd get the hard ass heavy metal guys that just went to the Bonham Exchange to beat the shit out of people. And we were GIs, so we'd always seek them out and fucking hit. We would just fucking hit them high and low. Go like, no, don't do that shit. I mean, I'm 6'2", fucking 185. I can fucking kick you. But before we get to Connecticut, I want to talk about Connecticut. I think it's an interesting thing about the right. You did reviews, record reviews. I'm gonna hit you with a
Yes.
total fucking curveball here, man. you
Okay.
you hit. I loved your reviews. I mean, I was reading them. You've got them archived someplace. I forget, and they're like scans
Yeah,
of
on my
the.
website.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
from the reviews from Exit Magazine.
to Exit
Yeah.
Magazine and Random Jams. I think it said, and I think it's one of them said Random Jam. How did you get started with doing that?
Well, mostly when I was living with Peter, because Peter was getting stuff published in
And
Cream
Cream.
Magazine, and he was friends with Lester Bangs and things like that. So um, I would write, I was inspired to write some stuff, for him, by him, and submitted them to Lester. I don't think I ever got anything printed in Cream, but also this local weekly started up in Cleveland called Exit, and they were looking for writers. So they were basically giving anybody a shot. So I thought, oh wow, great, and they let me write about. Well, I got to interview Sparks.
Really?
I got to to write a nice big piece about Sid Barrett and things like that. And uh, the Hunter Ronson Band album, they had a Rush thing. The the Columbia guy, they were having like a show, a record release party in Cleveland, and they were Rush releasing the album, but it wasn't quite ready yet. So the magazine, they needed something in the magazine, so they like expressed sent a demo copy of the album over to the plaza for me to listen to and then write a review. And then I had to rush down to the office and give them my review so they could print it that night.
Wow.
And it was pretty exciting stuff. It was a lot of fun.
Well, I'm gonna I'm
Especially,
gonna I'm gonna take 2 seconds and share some of the gems that I read. Just the lines, like the
oh,
fucking Hunter, like even Hunter was like, it's not the typical self-indulgent, on a record, and kind of how like Ronson saved the day on that. But like Hawkwind, like these are good. I got to read them off the thing. Hawkwind delivered a single with an actual melody. Now that's a great line. Six great musicians, one great chord. Still about
yeah.
Hawkwind. That's classic, right? And then you said you
Well,
saw him in Cleveland, and they were
oh yes.
clowning around, and and you wrote, "I would be skeptical, if not downright worried, if they took this garbage seriously." Now that's a fucking 20-some-year-old review. That's just a perfect review. You called Clapton a long and boring career, and who kicked the junk habit. Um, you were into 10cc. I saw you forecasted them to be an AM mainstay, which they are. I mean, you go to
Yeah.
now, you ever heard of this genre called yacht rock that all these people
Yeah.
listen to?
Oh yes.
Yeah,
Yes. Very big.
absolutely. Yeah, they're a yacht rock staple. You go to fucking
Oh, of
Newport.
course.
You're in any bar in Newport. You're hearing 10cc and Toto, all this shit out of
Absolutely.
Kraftwerk. LP is as entertaining as watching a melon rot.
I don't even remember that one.
Then you compare their artistic statement to the Cleveland Indians and Truman Capote. Hey, you did do the Sadistic Mika Band, which was a fucking cool ass band. You were like one of the only people that brought
Great
them up.
man.
God, they were so
Oh,
good.
yes.
Suki Suki, but they were jazz fusion. It was like John
It was a
McLaughlin,
yeah.
great fucking band that nobody
I
knows
know.
about.
Nobody knows about
You
them.
were
It's just amazing. There's a fantastic band.
totally. Eno, Seven Deadly Sins. How about if you were the one that slept through Fripp and Eno? Hey, Fripp did a in-store at Rendezvous, as a matter of fact. He was the most arrogant son of a bitch in the world. He did
Oh,
it downtown.
really?
Yeah, yeah, he did it downtown. Carl Douglas dance Kung
Oh,
Fu.
yeah. Foo Fighting. That was my. That I
That's
consider
the
that the
best
highlight of my
review. I
career.
put this on the stereo and promptly kicked 5 holes in my living room wall and broke the record into 1,000 pieces. Dude. Queen,
That-
personally, I don't think Queen has any more on the ball than Dragonwick, except for a recording contract. But then you go on and laud Queen. I mean, I was not a big Queen guy, and then after like 10 years ago, I listened to it again. So much music I panned, and I loved all kinds of music, but I panned so much FM, MMS bullshit in the 70s that I never gave it a chance, even. And you listen
yeah,
to it 40 years later, and you're like, okay, you know, Rumors was really a good record. I mean,
yeah, oh,
I was just like so arrogant back then. I still am not a big Pink Floyd, like post Barrett Pink Floyd guy, but there's so much of that music that I just paint. Jay Giles, I always thought was a joke. What a great fucking band they were, but Queen was another one of those.
yeah.
Um,
They were. Speaking of Jay Giles, probably one of the best concerts I ever went to was Jay Giles was involved with. Just it was Brownsville Station, Jay Giles, and Blue Oyster Cult.
no shit.
And it was just like one band just lit the fuse, the second one blew up, and the third one just tore the arena down.
No
It
kidding.
was it was nonstop.
Oh, Peter Wolf
Yeah,
was one of the best frontmen
yeah,
ever. I mean, and they
yeah.
were to me, they were the only. Well, I'm not a big Aerosmith guy, so I always say the best band that came out of Boston that nobody knows is from Boston was Jay Giles. I mean, they were just, they were a hell of a band. But two more quick ones. Black Oak, Arkansas. There was no lead solo on Taxman, despite having 3 lead guitarists in the band. Fucking Guitar Army.
I was just thinking of Jim Dandy the other day too. I was wondering whether he's still around or not.
Like on Outlaw Radio a couple years ago, they were kind of pimping him again. So he must have been touring. He can't be that much. He must be like your age, like my age. I mean, I'm 62, so he's probably like 10 years older than me.
Mhm.
But they were pimping him on Outlaw Country, like Mojo Nixon and those guys were. This was probably 4 or 5 years
Oh,
ago.
Mojo, yeah,
Yeah, they were
yeah.
still talking about Black Oak and all that stuff. And you talked about Paul McCartney. I couldn't figure out whether you liked him or not. You kind of
I
called him a
love
bozo.
I
Well, you
I
kind of said
love Paul McCartney.
he was a
That was
bozo, and then he was true to himself. But then on another review, you were like lauded Junior's Farm, which I
oh
always
God, yeah.
I always thought, who wrote that song? The
Uh,
guy that wrote "He Stopped Loving Her Today" co-wrote that by George Jones. Curly Putnam. He was a
oh
Navy,
really?
and he didn't write that song. I'm sorry. They wrote that song. I'm sorry. Paul wrote that song while they were staying at Curly's ranch out in Tennessee, at farm in
Wow.
Tennessee. And they hung with him for like a week partying, and that song came from that session out there. I always thought it was cool because he had that connection to George Jones, and I'm like, that's way out of line. You know what I mean? He
Yeah,
also
it
wrote
just
like "Green Green Grass a Home" and shit like that to Tom
oh
Jones record.
wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but no, I
And
loved your reviews. I just wanted to go. I just wanted,
well, thank you very much. I enjoyed writing that stuff. That was a period of time where it just everything was just fresh and new, and you were just having fun doing stuff. A lot of people at New Magazine and New Band, and just it just seemed like an exciting time, and that was part of it, and it was a lot of fun. I've never really done too much writing after that.
right. Well, so 1976. Now we get to Connecticut, right? And you come there blind. You get a job in Connecticut. Was it 76? Was that about right? It was
Yeah, I left Cleveland in September of '76 and moved out to New Haven.
excellent. And we had some weird commonalities in that sense. It's not like musically you're well beyond me, but I moved from when my hitch was up in the Air Force. I ended up staying in Texas for a few years just because the scene was cool still back then. Um,
Hmm.
but ended up in Connecticut, and it's just like the difference between Cleveland, Texas, and Connecticut was pretty stark. I mean, Connecticut had some shitholes. Father Panic. I lived in the north end of Hartford, which was no picnic. That blind
Oh,
just moved to Asylum Hill.
Albany Avenue.
I was on the corner of Albany and Garden. I lived on Ashley Street, frickin' Ashley Cafe. I'd go in there. My nickname was Spot because I was the only brother. And they were like, "What are you doing in here?" And I was like, "Hey, man, I know how to play dominoes. I can drink y'all under the table." I said, "Plus, your bar's right next to my house. If I can't go into a fucking bar next to my house, there's a problem in this world." They accepted me right away. It was cool. But there was Dixwell down where you were. But then there was like you'd get on the Merritt Parkway and you were like, wow, this is the gentry. Like you drive down towards
Oh,
Greenwich,
yeah.
or it was like money. Like you, like Bracknell had that little, in Lakewood they had little pockets, shaker little pockets of rich, but Connecticut had like swaths of rich.
Oh man, my one of the biggest eye openers was when we were getting settled in Connecticut and realizing I didn't even know Yale was right in the middle of New Haven.
Right there.
Living in New Haven, you really came up against that thing where people say there was that old saying, I forget who it was, that said the rich are different than you and I. And I just
Huh.
said, yeah, sure they are. You know, I lived in Lakewood. There were some kids that were better off than my family was. My family was pretty solidly middle class. We weren't wanting for anything, but we weren't rich, you know. But I had some friends that, you know, lived down like along the lake and in Clifton Park and that I went to school with. They were
Yeah,
rich,
the money.
but they were nothing like what I ran into occasionally in Connecticut from like Yale students. There
No.
was one time where my then wife, well then girlfriend, first wife, befriended this artist, this female artist who was dating this Yaley. So we went over to the Yaley's house one day. He lived up this hill up from campus in this beautiful Swiss chalet type house with two other Yale students. They had a butler, three 19-year-old guys, and a housekeeper, a male housekeeper guy who
Yeah.
took care of them, made the meals, and took care of the house and all that stuff.
Had you ever met?
This
You
all
never.
drove a
Yeah.
brand new whale tail Porsche. You know, I'm just like, whoa, this is a world that I have no idea.
I didn't know what trust fund babies were like until I moved to Connecticut. And just these
Mhm.
kids that they went to Yale, and even ones that didn't, they went to like Wesleyan and Trinity, some of the other private schools. I mean,
Oh yeah.
absolutely like never had to work. Like they were just going to, they were going to go sit in dad's boardroom, but they were Greenwich kids or Fairfield County kids that just, they weren't going to be, fucking nothing.
Well, we
Trust funds, just money. They just cash a
we
$10,000 check every fucking month, man.
Saucers played a dance at Choate, the prep
Yeah,
school.
in
Uh,
Wallingford, right?
that was yeah, that was just that was great.
It
It
shows
was
a
just
nice
awesome.
campus. Connecticut.
Yes, all of those are
We
beautiful.
didn't have, and that's another
Or
thing we didn't have. We had Catholic schools in Ohio. We had Lake Ridge Academy, I remember. There were a couple that were private schools for the gentry, but by and large it was private Catholic schools. But Connecticut, the private schools are huge. I mean,
yeah,
my wife and I both been in education in Connecticut for a long time, and it just all the private schools, and there's dozens of them, and they're $60,000. I know people that have gone to work as janitors in those schools to get their kids free tuition. That's it. So I mean, that's how
wow.
many there are up here. And, it's like, so first question before I get into the New Haven stuff: Pepe's or Sally's?
Modern, modern. I've
Yeah,
eaten.
there's that. Yeah, there's that faction of like, yeah, that's like saying Ubu.
I
Like,
I gotta say,
who's your favorite?
give me my here's my reasoning
A
for this.
pizza.
Is because when we moved there, we moved when we first moved to New Haven. We lived out in West Haven.
Oh,
We didn't
okay.
know any town, so moved into the first place we could find, so I could start work, so Lynn could find a job, and then once we got our bearings, we said, "Oh man, we shouldn't be living here. We should be living over here in New Haven." So we moved over on Orange Street in New Haven, over by East Rock, and right down the street was Modern
The
Pizza.
pizza.
So my first real experience with New Haven pizza was having a pizza there, and I loved it. I tried Sally's and Frank Pepe's and the Spot and all that, and they all were great, but you had to go farther to get them.
You knew the
Modern was right
spot.
there.
The
Yeah,
spot. The spot was the hidden gem. Everybody was
yeah,
in that fucking line to go to Pepe's up Worcester Street. There'd be 30 people in line on a Saturday night drinking beer, and the cops were cool. But if you
still
went,
do.
if you went almost to the front door, and there was a little
Hmm.
alley, and you just cut behind, you just said excuse me, and you cut through. People didn't even know it was back there. You'd go in there, and there was like 5 bingo tables set up, and it was the same pizza with the same
Yes,
beer. And it was the spot, and nobody knew except for like the locals. I mean, I was a Hartford kid,
that's right.
but I
Like a
loved the
local.
spot. And all the New Yorkers would be in there in their limousines and shit, getting out, going to frickin' Pepe's, and you'd be like, yeah, cool. No, we're just
Yeah.
going back there to take a piss behind the building. You know what I mean? It's
I and the clam, the
oh,
white broccoli and clam pizza at
dude.
Modern is just
Yeah, Modern
uh,
was a good pie. I didn't.
I
They
went
were
there.
all
Yeah.
great pizza
Oh,
joints.
they all are fantastic. I tell people out here, I
Well,
brought
Indiana. I mean, biscuits and
brought my
gravy.
band brought my band the Downfy about 10 years ago. We went out and played some dates in New England. And I told them when we got to New Haven, I said, I'm going to ruin pizza for you for the rest of your lives now. So I took them to Modern and we had pie. And even to this day, I have like Blaine. Just last time I saw Blaine, he mentioned, yeah, man, that pizza was so good.
And then you say like we might stand in line for 40 minutes to get pizza, and
Yep,
people are like, I ain't waiting in line 40 minutes to wait, and you go, just wait,
yep,
just
yep.
relax, because
Just,
the minute you get that greasy ass pile of shit pizza that Frank serves or any of them serve, you're like, uh-huh. Yeah, and it does it people don't realize that I mean it's that good. And New Haven pizza.
it's you can't describe it. There's a really good place here, which when we had the celebration of life for Claudia's passing here a couple of weekends ago, I ordered pizza from them because they are the closest I've found to have that flavor in the crust. It's all in the
In the crust,
crust.
and
It's in the
the
crust.
cornmeal on the bottom, and the grease, and
And I mentioned to the owner, I said, I've lived here for 30 years, but I came here from New Haven, Connecticut, and you are the closest in all the years I've been here I have ever found to what pizza tastes like in New Haven. And he looked at me and he goes, "Oh, thank you. That is a incredible compliment." He knew exactly what I was talking
they
about.
all do. That's
Yes.
awesome. I don't know. So now I want to talk a little bit because I love your New Haven years. I missed, unfortunately, the saucers by months, I think. But at least that first, I mean, I moved to Connecticut in '86, middle of '86. So I missed them by a little bit. But I
Well,
loved
he missed it by
I,
a while.
that Oh, well, yeah. I mean, most of the stuff I saw and listened to and, still listen to
Yeah.
um, seemed to be 78, 79, 80, 81.
78 to 80, the band 78 to 80 for
Right.
Saucers.
And there were a
Yeah.
couple iterations, right? I mean, and it was such a good band. But there was Mark Mulcahy,
Well,
Malcolm.
Mark and I were the only constant members throughout the 2 years that the band was active. Malcolm Doak was the original keyboard player, Malcolm Marsden, original guitarist, and Mark Mulcahy and myself. And then Malcolm Doak left, and we got Seth Tiven
Right.
as a second guitarist. Then Malcolm Marsden left, and we got Catherine Cormick, who played guitar and keyboards. And then that was, to the end of the band, that was the lineup.
So
So it was like
that first
three
session
different
you
versions.
did, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, that first session you did in '78 with Richard Robinson, who was Lou
Yeah,
Reed, David Joe. He did somebody else too,
yeah,
didn't he? Flaming
yeah. He
Groovies.
did. He did a lot of stuff with. There was a studio in Connecticut called Trodnossel, and he was involved with that. The Stones, Alan Klein did a lot of that. Stones anthology album was done out of there, and the Scratch Band that became the basis of the Saturday Night Live band with
Paul Schaefer.
not Paul
Oh,
Schaefer, G. Smith.
oh, okay.
Yeah, he was in that band, and anyway, yeah, that was all that we recorded there with Richard. That was the first session
So
with Malcolm,
if you
the
listen to
Mal.
your tracks, the heavy keyboards were that first session from like
Yes,
'78, right? And
yes,
I'm a guitar player, so I liked that session. But then the '79 session that y'all did with Robinson, and I think he was
that's
gone. Malcolm was gone by
yeah,
then.
right.
I loved
Malcolm,
that session. Like
Malcolm was going, yeah, with Seth Tiven, with that was the guitar, all guitar
I loved
band. Yeah,
that. I mean, I'm all about guitar, but just get
yeah.
everything out of the
Well, no,
way. And
that was, all of it was great in its own way, but you're right. There's like three distinct parts in Saucers where the sound is this way, and all three of them are just wonderful. I love it. I was so happy in 2001 or so. I met this guy from Cleveland named Jim Tennyson, and he was a fan of Saucers. I don't. He had found the single, living in Cleveland and things like that, and found my email address because I think this was even before Facebook or anything like that. He found my email address and he wrote me a letter and he said, "I have this friend out in L.A. that's got this label called Grand Theft Audio, and he puts out anthology albums of old punk bands, and he would be very interested in you because he's interested in Connecticut bands." So I got a hold of him, and sure enough, did a deal and put out that What We Did CD in 2002, which covers all of the stuff, studio stuff that we did. And it is just, I am just so proud of that record because, man, that was, like I said, when I left Cleveland, when Rocket broke up and things like that, I wanted to try to start something on my own to see if my songs could register with people, like songs that David and Peter and Kevin McMahon and Jamie and were writing, that if my songs could resonate like that. And with Saucers, they did, and I'm very proud of the years in Connecticut where that band, the Plan, Future Plan, the Bell System, and even the early days of the Rhythm Methodists,
Right.
all out in Connecticut.
Right. No, like I said, I knew, and for anybody that's listening, if you can go out to Bandcamp and find these Saucers cuts. As a matter of fact, there's a great download that's worth every penny. That's like 100 tracks of Saucers, the Future Plan, all of a bunch of your collection, and it's so worth every penny. And just no, believe me, the interview didn't have to go towards Connecticut, but the music brought me there because it's just such good music, and
It was, yeah, it was a great scene there in
well, that's
Connecticut.
what I
Yeah.
wanted to talk about because, like I said, I moved here in '86, and it took me a while to catch, just to kind of catch my breath because I'd never been to New England in my life, and I was in Hartford.
I was the same way when I moved there.
Right, and
Yeah.
it takes you a bit because you're just like
Yes,
it's not it's just weird, like Ohio and Texas was
there's so
just
much history.
totally like they don't get excited when there's a 300-year-old building next door to you. You
Yeah,
live in houses that
I
are
know
200 years
exactly.
old.
I came to New Haven and there was a house that was built and still being used that was built in the late 1600s. And
Absolutely.
holy cow, you're right. You don't get that. Even though I had, come from the East, I had lived in upstate New
Jersey.
York and I'd lived in New
Yeah.
Jersey. In fact, when I was a kid in New Jersey, and I didn't find this out till later, but we lived in Denville, New Jersey, outside of Dover, right on the edge of the mountains in New Jersey. And we would go up and play in the woods. And up in the woods were all these outcroppings of rocks that we used to play around. And I remember there were all these inscriptions engraved into the rocks, and some of them had dates on them, like 1777 and things like that. Found out years later that Washington's army, the year before Valley Forge, when they wintered down in Valley Forge, the winter before they wintered in the hills of northern New Jersey. And that's all those stones now, I think, have been discovered and preserved because those were the engravings of the soldiers from the Revolutionary War. Now, when I was a kid, I had no idea. I just thought that they were just, people scratching their names in
Yeah.
rocks.
No, there's so much
Amazing.
so much history.
You're so immersed in the history. Yeah, I was with New Haven going back there. I just, for the first couple of years, I would just stumble upon things and find out about the history of it and just be
Yeah,
amazed that,
absolutely. I mean, just
so,
the campus itself, once you break the wall and you're inside, you just are like, holy cow. It's just like there's no Harvard, you're up in Cambridge, it's got the same feel a little bit. And I'm not that haughty, believe me. I mean, I do not come from that, but you
yeah.
respect it when you're there. It's a kind of a different town now. It's been different, but I remember when I moved here, going to Cutler's at least once a month. Toads was having really good shows.
Hmm.
But I missed you guys, and that sucks. And I know you brought a couple songs from Cleveland to that band, and then some of the other songs. I just want to tell the folks, like, go out and find "I Didn't Get It." Find that song. That is a set ender. That is a. I don't know how you guys didn't. I don't know. It's weird. I don't know how you weren't on MTV. Because you weren't like a straight up fucking punk band. You guys were like this. I don't know how to describe it, but what I'm saying is the Saucers had a very distinct sound, and I would, you should be so proud of that the catalog that you guys put together. And for folks that don't know, um, my kind of introduction to knowing about the Saucers was from Mark, because Mulcahy, right? The Miracle Legion when I got here was kind of a big band. Like you
Yeah,
couldn't
yeah,
you couldn't drive in Connecticut and have your dial left to 90 and not hear the Miracle Legion.
no,
And
not
to
at
be
all.
fair, they were a good band.
Yeah,
I mean, and that goes back to that, like, you don't get territorial about your bands as you get older. It's like, and you wrote that, I remember writing once that, like, when he did the single on A Certain Kind of Shy, he did the vocals. And you
yes.
said that was his debut, his bow for lead vocals. And it was a seismic shift, is the way the way you put it. So he wasn't singing a lot before that. You can tell by the recordings it didn't sound like, but then he started to sing. Did he get the bug after that?
Well, I suppose so. You would have to ask Mark that,
Okay.
but after the Saucers broke up, he started a couple of bands where he was more singing, playing guitar, and things like that. So I think it did give him the confidence, or just give him the opportunity to sing. But yeah, he did a wonderful job on that song because
Awesome job.
you know I just couldn't do that. I couldn't do it as well as he could do it.
Yeah. No, and like I said, it fit your writing. And just so other folks know too, they kind of, and I wasn't huge into Miracle Legion. I mean, I thought they were a decent band. I mean, I wasn't into the genre too much, and they were compared, for folks that don't know, they were compared often to REM. And Mark kind of had that stipe look, with the hair and whatnot,
Yeah.
and the sound, when you read that now and you remember it, you kind of, you can hear the similarities. But I never had the impression they were trying. I mean, REM wasn't big enough really to mimic back then. When they cut their teeth, they were putting records out, but it wasn't. I think maybe a couple, and I wasn't huge into REM either. But I always thought that they were more authentic than that. That they weren't, that they weren't just a ripoff band of REM. Because
I never thought that either.
yeah,
I thought they were quite original. I
absolutely.
think Mark's songwriting. I was really impressed with Mark's songwriting because he did not show a lot of that when we were working together. But I was really impressed with
The
the first
the
single,
backyard. Yeah,
Backyard is a wonderful
I
song, beautiful song.
absolutely. And I mean, I still have that EP. I remember buying it at Cutler's because, again, you'd go to Cutler's from Hartford once a month because there
Yeah.
were no cool record stores north of Connecticut. In northern Connecticut, there was one in Enfield that was kind of cool, but Cutler's,
There used to be Capitol Records in
well,
Hartford.
yeah, Capitol Records, we know that. Yeah, absolutely. No, no,
Yes,
no.
it
Don't
did.
get me wrong. I mean, but it wasn't Cutler's, right? I mean, Cutler's was, you could go
No.
to Cutler's, you could, run over to the Kent and grab a pie if you didn't feel like going to Pepe's. You could grab a beer. You go to the Educated Burger, wasn't that right next to it? God, I want to say
That was in the area, yeah, it
it was.
was right nearby.
Yeah, exactly.
You ever
But
go to Waterbury and go to the Brass City Records? That was a really good
we used to
record
go
store
there
too.
when
Yeah.
we'd golf out at Richter Park, and we'd always stop there.
Yeah,
I never
old
left.
Walt. Walt was a great guy.
Yeah,
He passed away a few years ago, but he was a really cool dude.
yeah. I mean, but like I said, the Saucers folks need to really go back into the catalog, and and I'm not just saying purchase it to purchase it to purchase it, because it's worth it to have in your catalog. And that really, I thought that was a real, I don't want to say apex because that's not fair to say, but it was a real high time in your musical career, and I just
I
can't
thought it
imagine
was.
how that band didn't become more like popular. But you,
I agree, but it just shows that it's just a matter. A lot of times, it's just a matter of luck, of being in the right place at the right time, and the breaks going your way, and that just didn't seem to happen with Saucers. I remember somebody some years later wrote a piece, and the line that stuck out to me was he goes, they are the best band that he said the best thing that ever happened to the band was they never got signed,
really,
which I guess to him meant that we could be the way we wanted to be and not have any outside forces put on us, which is great, but at the same time, it sort of stalled the band out, and unfortunately, I mean, that's what happens. You get to a certain point with a band and you feel like you've exhausted everything you can do, and it hasn't seemed to made a dent with anything and gotten you, to that next step, so you've got to try something else.
Well, and that's what's weird is that you guys started out playing out in Milford, like Devon, that kind of area, right? Like that's where you
We
started, and
show
then
at the
Legs
handicap on Route 1 in Devon, yeah.
and Legs McNeil heard you,
Devon is what we call
and
it.
Legs McNeil heard you guys, right?
Oh, Legs McNeil heard us. We were rehearsing at our rehearsal space on the corner of Crown and Orange Street
That's
one
beautiful.
afternoon, and Legs and Tom Hearn were walking down the street, heard us, and came. And this happened. We met a lot of people this way. They would hear us, and they would just come upstairs, knock on the door, and go, "Wow, you guys sound great, man. Who are you?" And that's how we met Legs and Tom. And Tom was managing this band called the Survivors, out of these young kids out of Stratford and Bridgeport area. And he says, "Well, you want to do the show with these guys?" And these guys were so young that they had to have permission from their parents to do the show. And as soon as they were done, they had to leave the bar. So I mean, they were young. And Mike Checkeye, who's gone on, a tremendous drummer. I think he's with a band called the Live Ones right
Right.
now, and I think he was with the Fuzz Tones for a while.
That's right.
And Tommy T, or Tommy Endrikevich, played in that hockey band, the Zambonis, for a number of
No
years.
kidding, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, they're a Connecticut-based band that do hockey-related songs.
A lot of
Oh,
hockey up here. Never played hockey. Never been on skates in my life. I
I
don't get hockey.
I played hockey.
Oh, good for
So
you. It's a badass sport. It's tougher than nails, but we didn't have
it was fun.
we didn't play hockey. We played football and ran track and
Well, I
baseball.
played hockey in the Cleveland Metro Leagues actually for from the time I was like 11 or 12 until I was 18.
That must be West Side. I don't remember shit.
Well, they had two teams on the west side, two teams on the east side
I don't know
when
who
I
they
played.
were. We played football on the east side, but
Well,
but
this was a city league.
yeah.
We played at Halloran Rink over off 117th, and then there was a rink up in Windermere
No
over on the
kidding.
east side, which I'm not exactly sure. Was that
Holy cow.
by the Wade Oval or something over there?
Wow.
But yeah, it was fun.
That's good. So what were
And
the
then
venues down there? Were like Ron's Place, Oxford House, Toad's
those
Place. Those like you guys drew good crowds and stuff. Did you guys go to New York too and play, or did you just play around
Oh
Connecticut?
yes. No, we played CB's. We played Max's Kansas City. Played Kenny's Castaways and a couple other places down in New York. We played Bridgeport. We'd go up to Boston. Played the Rat. Played the Channel. Places like that. We would go up to Northampton and Hartford. Play a lot in Hartford.
Where'd you play in
Played.
Hartford?
We played at the Lit Club, which was the old Lithuanian Hall,
Yeah,
and then there was a place called 36 Lewis Street that we
36
played,
Lewis. Yeah,
and then we played the Municipal Cafeteria,
I've played
another
all of those.
place.
Well, I've played two of those venues,
Muni,
but
yeah,
yeah, the Muni's a
yeah.
freaking lunch.
But the Lit Club was, oh, the
Lit,
Lit
no, the
Club,
lit. Yeah, that
yeah,
was
that was great. That was legendary. We played with, oh God, who were those guys? Some English band there, and I'm hazing on the name of the English band, but they accused us of stealing their microphone. And I had this little English manager guy in my face screaming at me, "You've got our microphone! You got our microphone!" I'm going, "I don't have your fucking microphone, man. Just go away. Go away from me. You make me nervous."
When did you guys stop? So 80 what was with the end of the Saucers?
Saucers broke up in 1980.
Okay, God, I'm so pissed that I missed that. Because Lewis, I lived well in Asylum Hill. I could walk to Lewis. We walked to Lewis Street all the time. It didn't last long after I was here.
Well, Lewis Street was, by the time we were playing up at Hartford and Lewis Street, that was the plan and the bell system that were
Okay,
playing up there. Yeah.
God, seeing that.
One year, the Bell System was named the best punk band in Hartford and the best rock band in New Haven
Huh.
for the Advocate
The
Readers
Advocate,
Poll.
yeah, that's what, yeah, because there were two advocates. Oh, well, there were several, but I mean, New Haven had their own,
Yeah,
yeah,
Hartford had one. They had one out in
Northampton,
Smithfield and Northampton. Yeah.
right? They all had one. So that's a good, I'd say, and so what years were you guys playing in Hart? That pisses me off too, because
We played. I started I, s- I started the plan, well, it was called Plan 9, then it became Future Plan, then it became the Plan. But that band lasted in that iteration from 81 to 80, early 83. And then, uh, no, it was about 84. And then that band broke up, or basically it was just a personnel change, but it became the Bell System.
Right.
Changed the Bell System. But basically, that was the same band. It was me and Mike Barone, the drummer, and then there was Forrest Harlow, a couple of different, John March for a while. Then we went through a couple of different bass players, and then Claudia joined the band as the bass player.
Right.
And then Forrest left, and Tom O'Connell joined on guitar, and that pretty much was the run of that from 82 to 88.
Okay.
So about
So
six
I'm
years.
feeling less bad. I mean, I'm like I said, mid '86. That would have given me a couple of months, still getting
Yeah.
my feet wet and hard. And we were drinking all through Hartford, but it was because it was right down. I mean, just owning Hartford. But and I never thought of 36 Lewis Street as much of a music club. And talk about an old room. That's like
Yeah.
right behind by Bushnell Park. That shit was
Yeah.
built
Oh, that
17.
was decent. Yeah, that was over by the graveyard.
Absolute
You
right.
walk out,
Yeah.
walk around the
That's
graveyard.
been closed for freaking 40 years. But
Tom wrote a song after we played there one time called "Notes from a Graveyard" that he was inspired
really.
uh, by the graveyard there in Lewis Street. Yeah.
Now, it seemed like you could really tell the difference between Tom's songs and your songs, right? I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
so and he sang. So it's like if I'm looking at "Laughing in Your Past" and "Leave Me Empty" and
Yep.
"Swinging Emotions," those are all his. Yeah,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
because yours are clear, 62 Hawk, it's over. I mean, you're no, you have a real DNA to your writing that you can kind of spot, and it doesn't have a lot to do with Cleveland. I mean, it really doesn't. It doesn't. I mean, it draws some, but lyrically, rhythmically, chord change wise, and
Hmm.
they all start out not really complicated, but then they get complicated. I don't know. It's a kind of a weird way to critique it, but it's like, yeah, just because you start in D doesn't mean you stay there. Like you were saying when you did Final Solution, like, what do I do next? It's just,
Yeah, exactly.
it's fucking
Yeah,
cool as
well,
shit.
thank you. I appreciate that. I always tried to write when I was writing. I always tried to write non-specific things, but still have a point to what I'm trying to say. I don't. I try not. I try. Every song has a certain point to it. There's something I have to say in
Right.
it, and sometimes it's simple. Sometimes it's a little more complicated, I guess.
Well, I mean, I love and hate New York going back.
Well,
That's a
that one's not
ska
mine.
tune. I mean, that's
Yeah,
like,
but that's not me. That's Forrest Harlow.
well, I was gonna say that's
Yeah,
like that doesn't fit any. That's a ska tune to me. It's like
yeah,
I hear it's just it's got
yeah.
that. It's got that. And you guys did you specifically. You brought songs back to each of your projects that you had done in either. So there's a lot of
Oh
different
yeah,
versions of the same song that
this
each
is
take
true.
on a very cool gene. That's
I
a
can
little
make a
different.
whole album. I can make a whole album just out of the song Muckraker. In fact, Frank had talked to me about doing that
Are
one
you
time.
shitting me?
I told him one time. I said, yeah, I've got about half a dozen different versions of Muckraker. And he goes, oh, we should do a whole album of it sometime.
He's got the best ideas.
He does.
That
He
should have been
does.
his.
I'm hoping he gets the bug again because I'd love to work with him again.
I'm not sure that's gonna. Well, you never know.
Well,
You never
you
know.
never
Never
know.
say never. And like I said,
I am a true believer, believe me, in never saying no and never saying never to